Chapter 6. I never see this relative without thinking how odd it is that one sister, call her Sister A, can be so unlike another sister, whom we will call Sister B. My Aunt Agatha, for instance, is tall and thin, and looks rather like a vulture in the Gobi Desert, while Aunt Dahlia is short and solid, like a scrum half in the game of rugby football. In disposition, too, they differ widely. Aunt Agatha is cold and haughty, though presumably she unbends a bit when conducting human sacrifices at the time of the full moon, as she is widely rumoured to do. And her attitude toward me has always been that of an austere governess, causing me to feel as if I was 6 years old and she had just caught me stealing jam from the jam cupboard. Whereas Aunt Dahlia is as jovial and bonhomous as a pantomime dame in a Christmas pantomime. Curious. I welcomed her with a huge hallo, in both syllables of which her nephew's love and esteem could be easily detected, and went so far as to imprint an affectionate kiss on her brow. Later I would take her roundly to task for filling the house with Spodes and Madeline Bassets and bulging bounders in Panama hats, but that could wait. She returned my greeting with one of her uncouth hunting cries, yoicks, if I remember correctly. Apparently, when you've been with the Quorn and the Pytchley for some time, you drop into the habit of departing from basic English.
So, here you are, young Bertie.
You never spoke a truer word, up and doing with a heart for any fate.
As thirsty as ever, I observe. I thought I'd find you tucking into the drinks.
Purely medicinal. I've had a shock.
What gave you that?
Suddenly becoming apprised of the fact that the blighter Spode was my fellow guest. I said, feeling that I couldn't have a better cue for getting down to my recriminations. What on earth was the idea of inviting a fiend in human shape like that here? I said, for I knew she shared my opinion of the 7th Earl of Sidcup. You've told me many a time and oft that you consider him one of nature's gravest blunders, and yet you go out of your way to court his society, if court his society is the expression I want. You must have been off your onion, old ancestor. It was a severe ticking off, and you would have expected the blush of shame to have mantled her cheeks. Not that you would have noticed it much, her complexion being what it was after all those winters in the hunting field. But she was apparently impervious, that's the word, to remorse. She remained what Anatole would have called as cool as some cucumbers.
Ginger asked me to. He wanted Spode to speak for him at this election. He knows him slightly.
Far the best way of knowing Spode.
He needs all the help he can get, and Spode's one of those silver-tongued orators you read about. Extraordinary gift of the gab he has. He could get into Parliament without straining a sinew.
I dare say she was right, but I resented any praise of Spode. I made clear my displeasure by responding curtly, "Then why doesn't he?"
"He can't, you poor chump. He's a lord."
"Don't they allow lords in?"
"No, they don't."
"I see," I said, rather impressed by this proof that the House of Commons drew the line somewhere. "Well, I suppose you aren't so much to blame as I'd thought. How'd you get on with him?"
"I avoid him as much as possible."
"Very shrewd. I shall do the same. We now come to Madeline Bassett. She's here too. Why?"
"Oh, Madeline came along for the ride. She wants to be near Spode. An extraordinary thing to want, I agree. Morbid, you might call it. Florence Cray, of course, has come to help Ginger's campaign."
I started visibly. In fact, I jumped about 6 inches, as if a skewer or knitting needle had come through the seat of my chair. "You don't mean Florence is here as well?"
"With bells on. You seem perturbed."
I'm all of a twitter. It never occurred to me that when I came here I would be getting into a sort of population explosion.
"Whoever told you about population explosions?"
"Jeeves. They're rather a favourite subject of his. He says if something isn't done pretty soon—"
"I'll bet he said, if steps are not taken shortly through the proper channels."
He did, as a matter of fact. He said, if steps are not taken shortly through the proper channels, half the world will soon be standing on the other half's shoulders.
"All right, if you're one of the top layer."
"Yes, there's that, of course."
"Though even then it would be uncomfortable, tricky sort of balancing act." True. And difficult to go for a stroll if you wanted to stretch the legs. And one wouldn't get much hunting. Not much. We mused for a while on what lay before us, and I remember thinking that present conditions, even with Spode and Madeline and Florence on the premises, suited one better. From this to thinking of Uncle Tom was but a step. It seemed to me that the poor old buster must be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Even a single guest is sometimes too much for him. How, I asked, is Uncle Tom bearing up under this invasion of his cabin? She stared incredibly, or rather, incredulously. Did you expect to find him here playing his banjo? My poor half-witted child. He was off to the south of France the moment he learned that danger threatened. I had a picture postcard from him yesterday. He's having a wonderful time and wishes I was there. And don't you mind all these blighters overrunning the place? I would prefer it if they went elsewhere, but I treat them with saintly forbearance because I feel it's all helping Ginger. How do things look in that direction? And even better, I would say. The slightest thing might turn the scale. He and his opponent are having a debate in a day or two, and a good deal, you might say everything, depends on that.
Who's the opponent?
Local talent, a barrister.
Jeeves says Market Snodsbury is very straight-laced, and if the electors found out about Ginger's past, they would heave him out without even handing him his hat.
Has he a past?
I wouldn't call it that. Pure routine, I'd describe it as. In the days before he fell under Florence's spell, he was rather apt to get slung out of restaurants for throwing eggs at the electric fan, and he seldom escaped unjugged on boat race night for pinching policemen's helmets.
Would that lose him votes? Lose him votes? If it was brought to Market Snodsbury's attention, I doubt if he would get a single one. That sort of thing might be overlooked in the cities of the plain, but not in Market Snodsbury. So for heaven's sakes, don't go babbling about it to everyone you meet.
My dear old ancestor, am I likely to?
Very likely, I should say. You know how fat your head is.
I would have, this slur, and with vehemence, but the adjective she had used reminded me that we'd been talking all this time, and I hadn't inquired about the camera chap. By the way, I said, who would a fat fellow be?
Someone fond of starchy foods who had omitted to watch his calories, I imagine. What on earth, if anything, are you talking about?
I saw that my question had been too abrupt. I hastened to clarify it. Strolling in the grounds and messuages just now, I encountered an obese bird in a Panama hat with a pink ribbon, and I was wondering who he was and how he came to be staying here. He didn't look the sort of bloke for whom you would be putting out mats with welcome on them. He gave me the impression of being a thug of the first order. My words seemed to have touched a chord. Rising nimbly, she went to the door and opened it, then to the French window and looked out, plainly in order to ascertain that nobody, except me of course, was listening. Spies in spy stories do the same kind of thing when about to make communications which are for your ears only.
I suppose I'd better tell you about him,
she said. I intimated that I would be an attentive audience.
That's L.P. Runkle, and I want you to exercise your charm on him, such as it is. He has to be conciliated and sucked up to.
Why? Is he someone special?
You bet he's someone special. He's a big financier, Runkle's Enterprises, loaded with money.
It seemed to me that these words could have but one significance. You're hoping to touch him?
Such indeed is my aim, but not for myself. I want to get a round sum out of him for Tuppy Glossop.
Her allusion was to the nephew of Sir Roderick Glossop, the well-known nerve specialist and loony doctor, once a source of horror and concern to Bertram, but now one of my leading pals. He calls me Bertie, I call him Roddy. Tuppy, too, is one of my immediate circle of buddies, in spite of the fact that he once betted me I couldn't swing myself from end to end on the rings above the swimming pool at the Drones, and when I came to the last one, I found he'd looped it back, giving me no option but to drop into the water in faultless evening dress. This had been like a dagger in the bosom for a considerable period, but eventually time, the great healer, had ironed things out, and I had forgiven him. He has been betrothed to Aunt Dahlia's daughter Angela for ages, and I've never been able to understand why they hadn't got around to letting the wedding bells get cracking. I had been expecting every day for ever so long to be called on to weigh in with the silver fish slice, but the summons never came. Naturally, I asked if Tuppy was hard up, and she said he wasn't begging his bread and nosing about in the gutters for cigarette ends, but he hadn't enough to marry on.
Thanks to L.P. Runkle, I'll tell you the whole story.
Do.
Did you ever meet Tuppy's late father?
Once. I remember him as a dreamy old bird of the absent-minded professor type.
He was a chemical researcher, or whatever they call it, employed by Runkle's enterprises. One of those fellas you see in the movies who go out in white coats peering into test tubes. And one day he invented what were afterwards known as Runkle's magic midgets, small pills for curing headaches. You've probably come across them.
I know them well. Excellent for a hangover, though not, of course, to be compared with Jeeves's patent pick-me-up. They're very popular at the drones. I know a dozen fellows who swear by them. There must be a fortune in them.
There is. They sell like warm winter woolies in Iceland.
Then why is Tuppy short of cash? Didn't he inherit them?
Not by a jugful.
I don't get it. You speak in riddles, aged relative, I said, and there was a touch of annoyance in my voice, for if there is one thing that gives me the pip, it is an aunt speaking in riddles. If these ruddy midget things belonged to Tuppy's father,
L.P. Runkle claimed they didn't. Tuppy's father was working for him on a salary, and the small print in the contract read that all inventions made on Runkle's Enterprises' time became the property of Runkle's Enterprises. So when old Glossop died, he hadn't much to leave his son, while L.P. Runkle went on flourishing like a green bay tree.
I'd never seen a green bay tree, but I gathered what she meant.
Couldn't Tuppy sue? He would have been bound to lose. A contract is a contract.
I saw what she meant. It was not unlike that time when she was running that weekly paper of hers, Milady's Boudoir, and I contributed to it an article, or piece, as it is sometimes called, on what the well-dressed man is wearing. She gave me a packet of cigarettes for it, and it then became her property. I didn't actually get offers for it from France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and the United States, but if I had, I couldn't have accepted them. My pal, Boko Littleworth, who makes a living by his pen, tells me I ought to have sold her only the first serial rights, but I didn't think of it at the time. One makes these mistakes. What one needs, of course, is an agent. All the same, I consider that L.P. Runkle ought to have stretched a point and let Tuppy's father get something out of it. I put this to the ancestor, and she agreed with me.
Of course he ought. Moral obligation.
It confirms one's view that this Runkle is a stinker.
The stinker supreme. And he tells me he's been tipped off that he's going to get a knighthood in the New Year's honours.
How can they knight a chap like that?
Just the sort of chap they do knight. Prominent businessman. Big deals. Services to Britain's export trade.
But a stinker.
Unquestionably a stinker.
Then what's he doing here? You usually don't go out of your way to entertain stinkers. Spode, yes, I can understand you letting him infest the premises, much as I disapprove of it. He's making speeches on Ginger's behalf, and according to you doing it rather well. But why Runkle? She said, "Ah!" And when I asked her reason for saying, "Ah!" she replied that she was thinking of her subtle cunning. And when I asked what she meant by subtle cunning, she said, "Ah!" again. It looked as if we might go on like this indefinitely, but a moment later, having toddled to the door and opened it, and to the French window and peered out, she explained,
Runkle came here hoping to sell Tom an old silver whatnot for his collection, and as Tom had vanished and he'd come a long way, I had to put him up for the night. And at dinner I suddenly had an inspiration. I thought if I got him to stay on and plied him day and night with Anatole's cooking, he might get into mellowed mood.
She had ceased to speak in riddles. This time I followed her. So that you would be able to talk him into slipping Tuppy some of his ill-gotten gains?
Exactly. I'm biding me time. When the moment comes, I shall act like lightning. I told him Tom would be back in a day or two. Not that he will, because he won't come within 50 miles of the place till I blow the all clear. So Runkle consented to stay on.
And how's it working out?
The prospects look good. He mellows more with every meal. Anatole gave us his mignonette de poulet petit duc last night, and he tucked into it like a tapeworm that's been on a diet for weeks. There was no mistaking the gleam in his eyes as he downed the last mouthful. A few more dinners ought to do the trick.
She left me shortly after this to go and dress for dinner. I, strong in the knowledge that I could get into the soup and fish in 10 minutes, lingered on, plunged in thought. Extraordinary how I kept doing that, as of even date. It just shows what life is like now. I don't suppose in the old days I would have been plunged in thought more than about once a month. Chapter 7. I need scarcely say that Tuppy's hard case, as outlined by the old blood relation, had got right in amongst me. You might suppose that a fella capable of betting you couldn't swing yourself across the drone's swimming pool by the rings and looping the last ring back deserved no consideration, but as I say, the agony of that episode had long since abated, and it pained me deeply to contemplate the spot he was in. For though I had affected to consider that the ancestors' scheme for melting L.P. Runkle was the goods, I didn't really believe it would work. You don't get anywhere by filling with rich foods a bloke who wears a Panama hat like his. The only way of inducing the L.P. Runkle type of man to part with cash is to kidnap him, take him to the cellar beneath the lonely mill, and stick lighted matches between his toes. And even then he would probably give you a dud check. The revelation of Tuppy's hard-upness had come as quite a surprise. You know how it is with fellows you're seeing all the time. If you think about their finances at all, you sort of assume they must be all right. It had never occurred to me that Tuppy might be seriously short of doubloons, but I saw now why there had been all this delay in assembling the bishop and assistant clergy and getting the show on the road. I presumed Uncle Tom would brass up if given the green light, he having the stuff in heaping sackfuls, but Tuppy has his pride, and would quite properly jib at the idea of being supported by a father-in-law. Of course, he really oughtn't to have gone and signed Angela up with his bank balance in such a rocky condition, but love is love, conquers all, as the fella said. Having mused on Tuppy for about 5 minutes, I changed gears and started musing on Angela, for whom I had always had a cousinly affection. A definitely nice young prune, and just the sort to be a good wife, but of course the catch is that you can't be a good wife if the other half of the sketch hasn't enough money to marry you. Practically all you can do is hang around and twiddle your fingers and hope for the best. Weary waiting about sums it up, and the whole layout, I felt, must be G and wormwood for Angela, causing her to bedew her pillow with many a salty tear. I always find when musing that the thing to do is to bury the face in the hands, because it seems to concentrate thought and keep the mind from wandering off elsewhere. I did this now, and was getting along fairly well, when I suddenly had that uncanny feeling that I was not alone. I sensed a presence, if you would prefer putting it that way, and I had not been mistaken. Removing the hands and looking up, I saw that Madeline Bassett was with me. It was a nasty shock. I won't say she was the last person I wanted to see, Spode, of course, hitting the list of starters, with L.P. Runkle in close attendance, but I would willingly have dispensed with her company. However, I rose courteously, and I don't think there was anything in my manner to suggest that I would have liked to hit her with a brick, for I am pretty inscrutable at all times. Nevertheless, behind my calm front there lurked the uneasiness which always grips me when we meet. Holding the mistaken view that I am hopelessly in love with her, and more or less pining away into a decline, this Bassett never fails to look at me when our paths cross, with a sort of tender pity, and she was letting me have it now. So melting, indeed, was her gaze, that it was only by reminding myself that she was safely engaged to Spode that I was able to preserve my equanimity and sang-froid. When she had been betrothed to Gussie Fink Knottle, the peril of her making a switch had always been present, Gussie being the sort of spectacled, newt-collecting freak
a girl might at any moment get second thoughts about. But there was something so reassuring in her being engaged to Spode, because, whatever you might think of him, you couldn't get away from it that he was the 7th Earl of Sidcup, and no girl who has managed to hook a 7th Earl with a castle in Shropshire and an income of £20,000 per annum is likely going to change her mind about him. Having given me the look, she spoke, and her voice was like treacle pouring out of a jug.
"Oh, Bertie, how nice to see you again. How are you?"
"I'm fine. How are you?"
"I'm fine."
"That's fine. How's your father?"
"He's fine."
I was sorry to hear this. My relations with Sir Watkin Bassett were such that a more welcome piece of news would have been that he'd contracted bubonic plague and wasn't expected to recover. "I heard you were here," I said.
"Yes, I'm here."
"So I heard. You're looking well."
"Oh, I'm very, very well, and oh, so happy."
"That's good."
"I wake up each morning to the new day, and I know it's going to be the best day that ever was. Today I danced on the lawn before breakfast, and then I went round the garden, saying good morning to the flowers. There was a sweet black cat asleep on one of the flower beds. I picked it up and danced with it."
I didn't tell her so, but she couldn't have made a worse social gaffe. If there's one thing Augustus, the cat to whom she referred, hates, it's having his sleep disturbed. He must have cursed freely, though probably in a drowsy undertone. I suppose she thought he was purring. She paused, seeming to expect some comment on her fat-headed behaviour, so I said, "Euphoria."
"I what?"
"That's what it's called, Jeeves tells me, feeling like that."
"Oh, I see. I just call it being happy, happy, happy."
Having said which, she gave a start, quivered, and put a hand up to her face, as if she were having a screen test, and had been told to register remorse.
"Oh, Bertie."
"Hello?"
"I'm so, so sorry."
"Eh?"
"It was so tactless of me to go on about my happiness. I should have remembered how different it was for you. I saw your face twist with pain as I came in, and I can't tell you how sorry I am to think that it is I who have caused it. Life is not easy, is it?"
"Not very."
"Difficult.
"In spots."
The only thing is to be brave."
"That's about it."
"You must not lose courage. Who knows? Consolation may be waiting for you somewhere. Some day you will meet someone who will make you forget you ever loved me. No, not quite that. I think I shall always be a fragrant memory, always something deep in your heart that will be with you like a gentle, tender ghost, as you watch the sunset on summer evenings, while the little birds sing their off-to-bed songs in the shrubbery."
"I wouldn't be surprised," I said, for one simply has to say the civil thing. "You look a bit damp," I added, changing the subject. "Was it raining when you were out?"
"A little, but I didn't mind. I was saying good night to the flowers."
"Oh, you say good night to them, too?"
"Of course. Their poor little feelings would be so hurt if I didn't."
"Wise of you to come in. Might have got lumbago."
"That was not why I came in. I saw you through the window, and I had a question to ask you. A very, very serious question."
"Oh, yes."
"But it's so difficult to know how to put it. I shall have to ask it as they do in books. You know what they say in books."
"What who say in books?"
"Detectives and people like that. Bertie, are you going straight now?"
I beg your pardon?"
"You know what I mean. Have you given up stealing things?"
I laughed, one of those gay, debonair ones. "Oh, absolutely."
"I'm so glad. You don't feel the urge any more. You've conquered the craving. I told Daddy it was just a kind of illness. I said you couldn't help yourself."
I remembered her submitting this theory to him. I was hiding behind a sofa at the time, a thing I have been compelled to do rather oftener than I could wish, and Sir Watkin had replied, in what I thought dubious taste, that it was precisely my habit of helping myself to everything I could lay my hands on that he was criticizing. Another girl might have left it at that, but not M. Bassett. She was all eager curiosity.
Did you have psychiatric treatment? Or was it willpower?
Just willpower.
How splendid. I'm so proud of you. It must have been a terrible struggle.
Oh, so.
I shall write to Daddy and tell him.
Here she paused and put a hand to her left eye, and it was easy for a man of my discernment to see what had happened. The French window being open, gnats in fairly large numbers had been coming through and flitting to and fro. It's a thing one always has to budget for in the English countryside. In America they have screens, of course, which make flying objects feel pretty nonplussed. But these have never caught on in England, and the gnats have it more or less their own way. They horse around and now and then get into people's eyes. One of these, it was evident, had now got into Madeline's. I would be the last to deny that Bertram Wooster has his limitations, but in one field of endeavour I am preeminent. In the matter of taking things out of eyes, I yield to no one. I know what to say and what to do. Counselling her not to rub it, I advanced, handkerchief in hand. I remember going into the technique of operations of this kind with Gussie Fink-Nottle at Totley, when he had removed a fly from the eye of Stephanie Bing, now the Reverend Mrs. Stinker-Pinker, and we were in agreement that success could be achieved only by placing a hand under the patient's chin in order to steady the head. Omit this preliminary, and your efforts are bootless. My first move, accordingly, was to do so, and it was characteristic of Spode that he should have chosen this moment to join us, just when we twain were in what you might call close juxtaposition. I confess that there have been times when I felt more at my ease. Spode, in addition to being constructed on the lines of a rather oversized gorilla, has a disposition like that of a short-tempered tiger of the jungle, and a nasty mind which leads him to fall a ready prey to what I have heard Jeeves call the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on, viz. Jealousy. Such a man, finding you steadying the head of the girl he loves, is always extremely liable to start trying to ascertain the colour of your insides. And to avert this I greeted him with what nonchalance I could muster. "Oh, hello, Spode, old chap. I mean Lord Sidcup, old chap. Here we all are, what? Jeeves told me you were here, and Aunt Dahlia says you've been knocking the voting public base over apex with your oratory in the Conservative interest. Must be wonderful to be able to do that. It's a gift, of course. Some have it, some haven't. I couldn't address a political meeting to please a dying grandmother. I should stand there opening and shutting my mouth like a goldfish. You, on the other hand, just clear your throat and the golden words come pouring out like syrup. I admire you enormously." Conciliatory, I think you'll agree. I could hardly have given him the old salve with a more liberal hand, and one might have expected him to simper, shuffle his feet and mumble, "Awfully nice of you to say so," or something along those lines. Instead of which, all he did was come back at me with a guttural sound like an opera basso choking on a fishbone, and I had to sustain the burden of the conversation by myself. "I've just been taking a gnat out of Madeline's eye." "Oh." "Dangerous devils, these gnats. Requires skilled handling." "Oh." "Everything's back to normal now, I think?"
"Yes, thank you ever so much, Bertie."
It was Madeline who said this, not Spode. He continued to gaze at me bleakly. She went on harping on the thing.
"Bertie's so clever."
"Oh."
"I don't know what I would have done without him."
"Oh."
"He showed wonderful presence of mind."
"Oh."
"I feel so sorry, though, for the poor little gnat."
"It asked for it," I pointed out. "It was unquestionably the aggressor."
"Yes, I suppose that's true, but—"
The clock on the mantelpiece caught her now denatted eye, and she uttered an agitated squeak.
"Oh, my goodness, is that the time? I must rush."
She buzzed off, and I was on the point of doing the same, when Spode detained me with a curt, "One moment." There are all sorts of ways of saying, "one moment." This was one of the nastier ones, spoken with an unpleasant rasping note in the voice.
I want a word with you, Worcester."
I am never anxious to chat with Spode, but if I had been sure that he merely wanted to go on saying, "Oh," I would have been willing to listen. Something, however, seemed to tell me that he was about to give evidence of a wider vocabulary, and I edged toward the door. "Some other time, don't you think?"
"Not some ruddy other time. Now."
I shall be late for dinner."
"You can't be too late for me, and if you get your teeth knocked down your throat, as you will if you don't listen attentively to what I have to say, you won't be able to eat any dinner."
This seemed plausible. I decided to lend him an ear, as the expression is. "Say on," I said. And he said on, lowering his voice to a sort of rumbling growl, which made him difficult to follow. However, I caught the word read and the word book, and perked up a bit. If this was going to be a literary discussion, I didn't mind exchanging views. "A book?" I said.
"Book."
"You want me to recommend you a good book? Well, of course, it depends on what you like. Jeeves, for instance, is never happier than when curled up with his Spinoza or his Shakespeare. I, on the other hand, go in mostly for whodunits and novels of suspense. For the whodunit, Agatha Christie is always a safe bet. For the novel of suspense—" Here I paused, for he had called me an opprobrious name, and had told me to stop babbling. And it is always my policy to stop babbling when a man 8'6" in height and broad in proportion tells me to. I went into the silence, and he continued to say on.
"I said that I could read you like a book, Worcester. I know what your game is."
I don't understand you, Lord Sidcup."
"Then you must be as big an ass as you look, which is saying a good deal. I'm referring to your behavior towards my fiancée. I come into this room and I find you fondling her face."
I had to correct him here. One likes to get these things straight. "Only her chin."
"Pah!"
he said, or something that sounded like that. And I had to get a grip on it in order to extract the gnat from her eye. I was merely steadying it.
"You were steadying it gloatingly."
"I wasn't."
"Pardon me, I have eyes and can see when a man is steadying a chin gloatingly and when he isn't. You were obviously delighted to have an excuse for soiling her chin with your foul fingers."
"You are wrong, Lord Spodekup."
"And as I say, I know what your game is. You're trying to undermine me, to win her from me with your insidious guile. And what I want to impress upon you, with all the emphasis at my disposal, is that if anything of this sort is going to occur again, you would do well to take out an accident policy with some good insurance company at the earliest possible date. You probably think that being a guest in your aunt's house, I would hesitate to butter you over the front lawn and dance on the fragments in hobnailed boots, but you are mistaken. It will be a genuine pleasure. By an odd coincidence, I brought a pair of hobnail boots with me."
So saying, and recognizing a good exit line when he saw one, he strode out. And after an interval of tense meditation, I followed him. Repairing to my bedroom, I found Jeeves there, looking reproachful. He knows I can dress for dinner in 10 minutes, but regards haste askance, for he thinks it results in a tie which, even if adequate, falls short of the perfect butterfly effect. I ignored the silent rebuke in his eyes. After meeting Spode's eyes, I was dashed if I was going to be intimidated by Jeeves's. "Jeeves," I said, "you're fairly well up in hymns, ancient and modern, I should imagine. Who were the fellas in the hymn who used to prowl and prowl around?"
"The troops of Midian, sir."
"That's right. Was Spode mentioned as one of them?"
"Sir."
"I ask because he's prowling around as if Midian was his hometown. Let me tell you all about it."
"I fear it will not be feasible, sir. The gong is sounding."
"So it is. Who's sounding it? You said Seppings was in bed."
"The parlour maid, sir, deputizing for Mr. Seppings."
I like her wrist work. Well, I'll tell you later. Very good, sir. Pardon me, your tie. What's wrong with it? Everything, sir. If you will allow me. All right, go ahead. But I can't help asking myself if ties really matter at a time like this. There is no time when ties do not matter, sir. My mood was sombre as I went down to dinner. Anatole, I was thinking, would no doubt give us off his best, possibly his timbale de riz de veau toulousien, or his sylphide à la crème d'écrevisse. But Spode would be there, and Madeline would be there, and Florence would be there, and L.P. Runkle would be there. There was, I reflected, always something. Chapter 8. It has been well said of Bertram Wooster that when he sets his hand to the plough, he does not stop to pick daisies and let the grass grow under his feet. Many men in my position, having undertaken to canvass for a friend anxious to get into Parliament, would have waited till after lunch next day to get rolling, saying to themselves, "Oh, what difference do a few hours make?" and going off to the billiard-room for a game or two of snooker. I, in sharp contradistinction, as I have heard Jeeves call it, was on my way shortly after breakfast. It couldn't have been much more than 11:15 when, fortified by a couple of kippers, toast, marmalade, and 3 cups of coffee, I might have been observed approaching a row of houses down by the river, to which someone with a flair for the mot juste had given the name of River Row. From long acquaintance with the town, I knew that this is one of the posher parts of Market Snodsbury, stiff with householders likely to favour the Conservative cause, and it was for that reason that I was making it my first port of call. No sense, I mean, in starting off with the less highly priced localities, where everybody was bound to vote Labour, and would not only turn a deaf ear to one's reasoning, but might even bung a brick at one. Ginger no doubt had a special posse of tough supporters, talking and spitting out of the side of their mouths, and they would attend to the brick-bunging portion of the electorate. Jeeves was at my side, but whereas I had selected number 1 as my objective, his intention was to push on to number 2. I would then give number 3 the treatment, while he did the same to number 4. Talking it over, we had decided that if we made it a double act and blew into a house together, it might give the occupant the impression that he was receiving a visit from the plainclothes police, and excite him unduly. Many of the men who live in places like River Row have a tendency to apoplectic fits as the result of high living, and a voter expiring on the floor from shock means a voter less on the voting list. One has to think of these things. "What beats me, Jeeves," I said, for I was in thoughtful mood, "is why people don't object to somebody they don't know from Adam muscling into their homes without a what? It's on the tip of my tongue. A with your leave or a by your leave, sir. That's right. Without a with your leave or a by your leave, and telling them which way to vote. Taking a liberty, it strikes me as. It is the custom at election time, sir. Custom reconciles as to everything. A wise man once said. Shakespeare? A Burke, sir. You will find the apothegm in his On the Sublime and Beautiful. I think the electors, conditioned by many years of canvassing, would be disappointed if nobody called on them. So we shall be bringing a ray of sunshine into their drab lives. Something on that order, sir. Well, you may be right. Have you ever done this sort of thing before? Once or twice, sir, before I entered your employment. What were your methods? I outlined as briefly as possible the main facets of my argument, bade my auditors good-bye, and withdrew. No preliminaries? Sir, you didn't make a speech of any sort before getting down to brass tacks? No mention of Burke or Shakespeare or the poet Burns? No, sir. It might have caused exasperation. I disagreed with him. I felt that he was on the wrong track altogether, and couldn't expect anything in the nature of a triumph at number 2. There's probably nothing a voter enjoys more than hearing the latest about Burke and his On the Sublime and Beautiful. And here he was, deliberately chucking away the advantages his learning gave him. I had half a mind to draw his attention to the parable of the talents, with which I had become familiar when doing research for that Scripture Knowledge Prize I won at school. Time, however, was getting along, so I passed it up, but I told him I thought he was mistaken. Preliminaries, I maintained, were of the essence. Breaking the ice is what it's called. I mean, you just can't barge in on a perfect stranger and get off the mark with an abrupt, "Hoy there, hope you're going to vote for my candidate." How much better to say, "Good morning, sir, I can see at a glance that you are a man of culture, probably never happier than when reading your Burke. I wonder if you are familiar with his On the Sublime and Beautiful." Then away you go, off to a nice start. "Well, you must have an approach," I said. "I myself am all for the jolly genial. I propose, on meeting my householder, to begin with a jovial, 'Hello there, Mr. Whatever it is, hello there,' thus ingratiating myself with him from the kick-off. I shall then tell him a funny story, and then, only then, will I get to the nub, waiting, of course, till he has stopped laughing. I can't fail." "I'm sure you will not, sir. The system would not suit me, but it is merely a matter of personal taste." "The psychology of the individual, what?" "Precisely, sir. By different methods, different men excel." "Burke?"
"Charles Churchill, sir, a poet who flourished in the early 18th century. The words occur in his Epistle to William Hogarth."
We halted. Cutting out a good pace, we had arrived at the door of number 1. I pressed the bell. "0 hour, Jeeves?" I said gravely.
"Yes, sir."
"Carry on."
"Very good, sir."
"Heaven speed your canvassing."
"Thank you, sir."
"And mine."
"Yes, sir."
He pushed along and mounted the steps of number 2, leaving me feeling rather as I'd done in my younger days at a clergyman uncle's place in Kent, when about to compete in the choir boys' bicycle handicap, open to all those whose voices are not broken by the first Sunday in Epiphany. Nervous, but full of the will to win. The door opened as I was running through the high spots of the laughable story I planned to unleash when I got inside. A maid was standing there, and conceive my emotion when I recognized her as one who had held office under Aunt Dahlia the last time I had enjoyed the latter's hospitality, the one with whom, the old sweats will recall, I had chewed the fat on the subject of the cat Augustus, and his tendency to pass his days in sleep, instead of bustling about and catching mice. The sight of her friendly face was like a tonic. My morale, which had begun to sag a bit after Jeeves had left me, rose sharply, closing at nearly par. I felt that even if the fellow I was going to see kicked me downstairs, she would be there to show me out and tell me that these things are sent to try us, with the general idea of making us more spiritual. "Why, hello," I said. "Good morning, sir. We meet again." "Yes, sir." "You remember me?" "Oh, yes, sir." "And you've not forgotten Augustus?" "Oh, no, sir." "He's still as lethargic as ever. He joined me at breakfast this morning. Just managed to keep awake while getting outside his portion of kipper. Then fell into a dreamless sleep at the end of the bed with his head hanging down. So, you have resigned your portfolio to Aunt Dahlia's since we last met? Too bad. We shall all miss you. Do you like it here?" "Oh, yes, sir." "That's the spirit. Well, getting down to business, I've come to see your boss on a matter of considerable importance. What sort of chap is he? Not too short-tempered? Not too apt to be cross with callers, I hope?" "It isn't a gentleman, sir, it's a lady, Mrs. McCorkadale." This chipped quite a bit off the euphoria I was feeling. I had been relying on the story I had prepared to put me over with a bang, carrying me safely through the first awkward moments, when the fellow you've called on without an invitation is staring at you, as if wondering to what he owes the honour of this visit. And now it would have to remain untold. It was one I'd heard from Cats meet Potter Purbright at the Drones, and it was essentially a Conte whose spiritual home was the smoking room or the men's washroom on an American train. In short, one by no means adapted to the ears of the gentler sex, especially a member of that sex who probably ran the local watch committee. It was, consequently, a somewhat damped Bertram Wooster whom the maid ushered into the drawing-room, and my pep was in no way augmented by the first sight I had of mine hostess. Mrs. McCorquodale was what I would call a grim woman. Not so grim as my Aunt Agatha, perhaps, for that could hardly be expected, but certainly well up in the class of Jael, the wife of Heber, and the Madame, whoever it was, who used to sit and knit at the foot of the guillotine during the French Revolution. She had a beaky nose, tight, thin lips, and her eye could have been used for splitting logs in the teak forests of Borneo. Seeing her steadily and seeing her whole, as the expression is, one marvelled at the intrepidity of Mr. McCorquodale in marrying her, obviously a man whom nothing could daunt. However, I had come there to be jolly and genial I was resolved to be. Actors will tell you that on these occasions, when the soul is a twitter, and the nervous system not like mother makes it, the thing to do is to take a deep breath. I took 3, and immediately felt much better. "Good morning, good morning, good morning," I said. "Good morning," I added, rubbing it in, for it was my policy to let there be no stint. "Good morning," she replied, and one might have totted things up as so far so good. But if I said she said it cordially, I would be deceiving my public. The impression I got was that the sight of me hurt her in some sensitive spot. The woman, it was plain, shared Spode's view of what was needed to make England a land fit for heroes to live in. Not being able to uncork the story, and finding the way her eye was going through me like a dose of salts more than a little trying to my already dented sang-froid, I might have had some difficulty in getting the conversation going, but fortunately I was full of good material, just waiting to be decanted. Over an after-dinner smoke on the previous night, Ginger had filled me in on what his crowd proposed to do when they got down to it. They were going, he said, to cut taxes to the bone, straighten out our foreign policy, double our export trade, have 2 cars in the garage and 2 chickens in the pot for everyone, and give the pound the shot in the arm it had been clamouring for years. Than which, we both agreed, nothing could be sweeter, and I saw no reason to suppose that the McCorquodale gargoyle would not feel the same. I began, therefore, by asking her if she had a vote, and she said, "Yes, of course." And I said, well, that was fine, because if she hadn't had, the point of my argument would have been largely lost. An excellent thing, I've always thought, giving women the vote. I proceeded heartily, and she said, rather nastily it seemed to me, that she was glad I approved. When you cast yours, if cast is the word I want, I strongly advise you to cast it in favour of Ginger Winship. On what do you base that advice? She couldn't have given me a better cue. She'd handed it to me on a plate with watercress round it. Like a flash, I went into my sales talk, mentioning Ginger's attitude toward taxes, our foreign policy, our export trade, cars in the garage, chickens in the pot, and first aid for the poor old pound, and was shocked to observe an entire absence of enthusiasm on her part. Not a ripple appeared on the stern and rock-bound coast of her map. She looked like Aunt Agatha listening to the boy Wooster trying to explain away a drawing-room window broken by a cricket ball. I pressed her closely. Or do I mean keenly? "You want taxes cut, don't you?" "I do." "And our foreign policy bumped up?" "Certainly."
and our exports doubled, and a stick of dynamite put under the pound? I'll bet you do. Then vote for Ginger Winship, the man who, with his hand on the helm of the ship of state, will steer England to prosperity and happiness, bringing back once more the spacious days of good Queen Bess. This was a line of talk that Jeeves had roughed out for my use. There was also some rather good stuff about this sceptred isle and this other Eden, Demi-something, but I'd forgotten it. "You can't say that wouldn't be nice," I said. A moment before, I wouldn't have thought it possible that she could look more like Aunt Agatha than she had been doing, but she now achieved this breathtaking feat. She sniffed, if not snorted, and spoke as follows.
"Young man, don't be idiotic. Hand on the helm of the ship of state, indeed. If Mr. Winship performs the miracle of winning this election, which he won't, he will be an ordinary, humble backbencher, doing nothing more notable than saying 'Hear, hear,' when his superiors are speaking, and 'Oh,' and 'Question,' when the opposition has the floor. As," she went on, "I shall, if I win this election, as I intend to." I blinked. A sharp, "What was that you said?" escaped my lips, and she proceeded to explain, or as Jeeves would say, elucidate. "You're not very quick at noticing things, are you? I imagine not, or you would have seen that Market Snodsbury is liberally plastered with posters bearing the words, 'Vote for McCorquodale.' An abrupt way of putting it, but one that is certainly successful in conveying its meaning." It was a blow, I confess, and I swayed beneath it like an aspen, if aspens are those things that sway. The Worcesters can take a good deal, but only so much. My most coherent thought at the moment was that it was just like my luck when I sallied forth as a canvasser to collide, first crack out of the box, with the rival candidate. I also had the feeling that if Jeeves had taken on number 1 instead of number 2, he would probably have persuaded Ma McCorquodale to vote against herself. I suppose if you had asked Napoleon how he had managed to get out of Moscow, he would have been a bit vague about it, and it was the same with me. I found myself on the front steps with only a sketchy notion of how I'd got there, and I was in the poorest of shapes. To try to restore the shattered system, I lit a cigarette and had begun to puff when a cheery voice hailed me, and I became aware that some foreign substance was sharing my doorstep. "Hello, Worcester, old chap," it was saying, and, the mists clearing from before my eyes, I saw that it was Bingley. I gave the blighter a distant look. Knowing that this blot on the species resided in Market Snodsbury, I had foreseen that I might run into him sooner or later. So I was not surprised to see him, but I certainly wasn't pleased. The last thing I wanted in the delicate state to which the McCorquodale had reduced me was conversation with a man who set cottages on fire and chased the hand that fed him hither and thither with a carving knife. He was as unduly intimate, forward, bold, intrusive, and deficient in due respect as he had been at the Junior Ganymede. He gave my back a cordial slap, and would, I think, have prodded me in the ribs if it had occurred to him. You wouldn't have thought that carving knives had ever come between us. "And what are you doing in these parts, cocky?" he asked. I said I was visiting my aunt, Mrs. Travers, who had a house in the vicinity, and he said he knew the place, though he had never met the old geezer to whom I referred. "I've seen her around. Red-faced old girl, isn't she?" "Fairly vermilion." "High blood pressure, probably." "Or caused by going in for a lot of hunting. It chaps the cheeks." "Different from a barmaid. She cheeks the chaps." If he had supposed that his crude humour would get so much as a simper out of me, he was disappointed. I preserved the cold aloofness of a Wednesday matinee audience, and he proceeded. "Yes, that might be it. She looks a sport. Making a long stay?" "I don't know."
I said, for the length of my visits to the old ancestor is always uncertain. So much depends on whether she throws me out or not. Actually, I'm here to canvass for the Conservative candidate. He's a pal of mine. He whistled sharply. He had been looking repulsive and cheerful. He now looked repulsive and grave. Seeming to realize that he had omitted a social gesture, he prodded me in the ribs. "You're wasting your time, Worcester, old man," he said. "He hasn't an earthly." "No?" I quavered. It was simply one man's opinion, of course, but the earnestness with which he had spoken was unquestionably impressive. "What makes you think that?" "Never you mind what makes me think it. Take my word for it. If you're sensible, you'll phone your bookie and have a big bet on McCorkerdale. You'll never regret it. You'll come to me later and thank me for the tip with tears in your—" At some point in this informal interchange of thoughts by spoken word, as Jeeves's Dictionary of Synonyms put it, he must have pressed the bell, for at this moment the door opened and my old buddy the maid appeared. Quickly adding the word eyes, he turned to her. "Mrs. McCorkerdale in, dear?" he asked, and having been responded to in the affirmative, he left me, and I headed for home. I ought, of course, to have carried on along River Row, taking the odd numbers while Jeeves attended to the even, but I didn't feel in the vein. I was uneasy. You might say, if you happen to know the word, that the prognostications of a human wart like Bingley deserve little credence. But he had spoken with such conviction, so like someone who has heard something, that I couldn't just pass them off with a light laugh. Brooding tensely, I reached the old homestead and found the ancestor lying on a chaise longue, doing the observer crossword puzzle.